Welcome to the Ray Harryhausen podcast, the show dedicated to the life, career and films of a special effects titan. Join us as we host in-depth discussions about the work, influences and legacy of this uniquely talented filmmaker. Brought to you by the Ray and Diana Harryhausen Foundation, we will be delving into Ray's archive to bring a unique insight into his work, including exclusive audio from the man himself from our own archives. We will be joined by special guests for retrospectives, exclusive announcements and competitions. So this podcast is a must-listen for all fans of the world of Ray Harryhausen, animation and classic filmmaking. Hey, hello and welcome to episode 33 of the Ray Harryhausen podcast, and one that we're recording on the month of the centenary of Ray Harryhausen, and I'm joined by two very special guests for our Top 10 Harryhausen Creations podcast. First of all, we have John Walsh, trustee and filmmaker. Hi, John.
Hello.
And a very special guest, Vanessa Harryhausen, Ray's daughter, also a trustee of the foundation and author of upcoming publication, Ray Harryhausen, Titan of Cinema. Hello, Vanessa.
Hello to you all.
That's great to have all three of us here, isn't it? Because as much as myself and Connor normally host these podcasts, Vanessa is always present. So, you know, Vanessa, although you've popped into podcasts occasionally in the past, you're always with us, aren't you? So you're always with the foundation, the collection and Connor. And you're excited today, I imagine, about the top 10, just like Top of the Pops, isn't it? The top 10 creatures as ranked by the world of Ray Harryhausen fans.
I know, it's really exciting. Looking at the list, it's extraordinary that some of them are not the ones I sort of expected, but it's very exciting.
Well, what I think this has been a very interesting project to see what the eventual top 10 will be, but also the types of creatures that people are voting for. And looking at the poll, there's some 60 different creatures from all of your father's films in there. And every single one of them has votes. And we've been posting every creature onto our social media account, and there's not a single creature that we've posted a picture of that somebody hasn't piped up and said, oh, that's my favourite scene, or I remember this film so well. So every one of your father's creations is somebody's favourite, and that's been really interesting to see just how that dynamic works, what stands out to people, what specific scenes from films stand out, why certain creatures have really imprinted themselves into people's imaginations so many years later. And so, yeah, this is, as you say, very exciting just to count down the ultimate top 10 Harryhausen poll.
Now, originally this was planned to be part of the National Gallery of Scotland's wonderful Titan of Cinema exhibition, Ray Harryhausen, Titan of Cinema. And of course, now that has been slightly delayed until later in the year, this poll was going to be announced as part of the exhibition, and it was going to be revealed to the press there at the location of the museum. And we were hoping to have some people come across from the pond, from the other side of the pond, to sit with us and look at the top 10 in front of an audience. But we've decided that we'll stick to the dates. You are going to see as well as hear who the top 10 are. And of course, if you come to the National Gallery of Scotland later in the year, we hope to have a special screening on stage in front of an audience with Vanessa in a goggle box scenario with some people on the sofa. Might be John Landis, who knows who's going to be coming along. But you'll get to ask maybe some questions about the top 10 and the controversies that might be there. So maybe without further ado, we should kick off perhaps with number 10. This is only one of two black and white appearances for Ray Harryhausen's creature.
The Redosaurus from The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, 1953. Which, of course, was your dad's first solo picture, and a film that celebrated its 67th anniversary this month.
Yeah, when you see the film, it looks a little bit dated, but I mean, it is still the creature is still done very well.
Well, the landmark thing about that was because just before, when your father worked on Mighty Joe Young, there was some controversy around that because the studio had said the film cost a lot more money than it did. So through an accounting sort of trick, they put, as it were, some of the losses from RKO for that year onto Mighty Joe Young. And so people perceived that Mighty Joe Young was very expensive because of the trick photography. So of course, when Beast from 20,000 Fathoms was greenlit, it had a very small budget, even for the time, even for 1953, $200,000. So the film had to be shot very quickly, very cheaply, and where possible using stock footage. But of course, it went on just in box office alone at the time to make $5 million, making it one of the most successful films of that year for dollar spent and dollar earned. So a great success, and I think the one that really cemented your father's career, because without Beasts and 20,000 Fathoms launching Ray Harryhausen, we may not have had the wonderful top 10 that we are looking at. And of course, Warner Brothers have beautifully remastered the original film, and now it looks resplendent in its high definition glory. But would you be hard pressed to find a Redosaurus in a museum?
I don't know. Probably.
Well, it's one that your dad invented, so there's no end to his creative talents inventing dinosaurs. But of course, the another nice thing about that particular film was it allowed your dad's career to dovetail with his best friend Ray Bradbury, because he of course wrote the short story, the Foghorn, that the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms was based upon. So a nice crossover there, the two childhood friends, adult careers overlapping, and that's obviously something that a lot of people treasure as well. The Bradbury and Harryhausen connection there in 1953.
Well, the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, I had to create a mythical dinosaur, which was sort of the main menace, called the Redosaurus.
It's unbelievable.
Everybody confuses it. They think that the Redosaurus is Ray Harryhausen with a saurus put on the end of it.
Now we've left people guessing as to what's going to be the second black and white film. Well, you'll have to wait a little while to find that out. And I wonder if Vanessa would like to announce number 9.
It is Gwangi.
Absolutely, Gwangi from the Valley of Gwangi, and this is a real dinosaur, isn't it? Because this is one that you may find in a museum. A Tyrannosaurus Rex. Is it a Tyrannosaurus Rex?
Yeah,
it is a Tyrannosaurus Rex, isn't it?
I think it is. Yeah, don't ask me. All I know is I was too young. All I know it was my cuddly toy.
Yeah, I've had a good chat with Alan Friswell about this. Alan is a dinosaur expert on top of everything else, and he was giving me a blow-by-blow account of all the Tyrannosaurus features and all the Allosaurus features. To be honest, to me, I would just say it's a Tyrannosaurus Rex, but I know that vintage dinosaur fans can be very passionate about these distinctions, so I think it's fair to say that he falls into both camps. You could see a Tyrannosaurus or an Allosaurus at a natural history museum, and either way, Gwangi is a fantastic creation. I know he's one of your favourites, Vanessa.
Well, yes, it goes back to obviously my early childhood when I was allowed to have him in my baby buggy, so instead of a doll, so that's why I like him.
And somebody said something, there was a comment as well when you're out in public about it.
Yeah, I think Mum was at Harrods, and some old ladies were behind us. We were in a queue in Harrods at, I can't remember if it was a fish counter or some counter, and they wanted to have a look at the dolly, and so I said sure, and they pulled back the cover, and there was Gwangi all in it, baring his teeth and just lying there, and they were horrified. But he never scared me. None of Dad's creatures scared me, except for one, which I'll mention later.
And that was 1969, of course, The Valley of Gwangi from Warner Brothers. And the film, again, beautifully restored by Warner Brothers. And the creature as well, Gwangi himself or herself, is in pretty good nick.
Its teeth are as sharp as ever.
Another fantastic restoration job by Alan Friswell. And yes, Alan really worked his magic with Gwangi. Gwangi had, you may have seen in some of the sort of earlier pictures of the creature or earlier exhibitions, Gwangi had kind of deteriorated over the years, just as a natural result of latex deterioration. And so by the time Alan came to restore that particular model, the jaw had almost completely fallen away. There were all kinds of little bits and pieces that needed to be repaired. But now if you see Gwangi, and it's been on exhibition with the touring Into the Unknown exhibition across Europe over the last few years. He's perfect. Guanji is perfect once more. He looks like he could have just jumped off the screen in 1969, and he will be part of our Titan of Cinema exhibition in Edinburgh when it does open. He'll be one of the centerpieces, because I know people want to see Guanji. Is such a favourite. I think that film in particular is such a cult favourite amongst fans. It really made an impact amongst the people who saw it in later years on DVD or on VHS.
I think the music helps a lot too, and it being sort of a cowboy film adds a little bit of a difference, you know. And of course, the whole animation of all the, you know, Guanji and the Eohippus and everything else is the roping scene in that is amazing as well.
Well, you know, the soundtrack got its first CD release, I think it was just last year, from Entrada Records. Yeah. And it sounds wonderful. It's a very particular type of score. It particularly suits that film. We were talking there, Connor, about Alan Friswell. For people who've heard us mention that name now a few times during this podcast and who may be listening to us for the first time, how very dare you listening to us for the first time, and it's episode 33, but there are people out there who haven't binged listened to us, even though we're on Spotify and iTunes. Alan Friswell, of course, is a restoration expert, but of course he's more than that, Connor, isn't he? He had a special relationship with Ray Harryhausen himself.
Yes, Alan was the only person that Ray ever hired directly to restore his models. And I think that's such a fantastic link to have, especially for somebody like me who didn't meet Ray in person. It's really important to me to have that link. But Alan didn't just repair the models. He sat down with Ray for hours and discussed different materials, different philosophies towards restoration, how Ray would like to see the models being restored going forward. And I think one of the great things about Alan is he does seem to have like a photographic memory, so he remembers every word that he was given by Ray about how the restoration should be carried out. And many of the models in our collection which have been restored were done so during Ray's lifetime. So Alan would take the models away, take the Allosaurus, for example, and repair the Allosaurus, and then bring it back to your father and say, you know, here, Mr. Harryhausen, I've repaired the Allosaurus, and this is how I did it. This is the materials I used. And sadly, since your dad is no longer here, we have had Alan restore, you know, so much of the rest of the collection now. And it's no exaggeration to say that the exhibitions that we've had over the last couple of years and the exhibition at the National Galleries of Scotland wouldn't be possible on the same scale without Alan's input, because some of the models had just deteriorated to the point where they could no longer be moved or be handled. And Alan has worked his magic on some of the most iconic creations of all time. Just some recent examples that pop to mind include Mighty Joe Young, Talos, Callie, and so many others. And you know, he's really doing an important job, and we're all very proud of Alan. Vanessa, I know you love watching him work.
Yeah, no, it sets me back to seeing Dad work in the studio at home, and it's great seeing the creativity and the techniques that Alan is using, and knowing that Dad, you know, was happy with how Alan did restore them and is restoring them. It's very comforting to see it, actually. It just makes me smile.
Well, hopefully you'll be able to see all of Alan's creatures if you come up to the exhibition fully restored. And I'd like Alan maybe to give a talk at National Gallery of Scotland and show us some before and after pictures, because I love watching those makeover shows on TV where you see it before and you're like, oh, horrified, and you see it after and you think, oh, lovely, I'll have one of those.
It was very tricky, the roping sequence. It required the cowboys throwing lassos over an animated model, which would be shot later after the production. So we had a Jeep portraying the dinosaur, and he was just outside the camera range where the split screen would be.
Now, moving us on, our number 8. And it's one of the creatures that's needed one of the least amount of restorations. It's the original skeleton. So, of course, the skeleton from Seven Voyages of Sinbad, talk about iconic, you know, it's right up there. You know, it's not a surprise to see these. And what do you guys think of that?
Well, I love that. I like the sequence of the skeleton going up the spiral staircase. I think that is so iconic. It's so daddy and the motion and everything. So I'm tickled pink.
And it's such an important model in terms of the entire collection, because as well as being an iconic sequence, it was really one of the centerpieces for the seventh voyage of Sinbad. And Ray had created artwork for the film sort of 5 or 6 years before the movie had been released, and he was coming up with all these ideas. This is what I'd like to see on the big screen. You know, stop motion films up until that point had mostly been about dinosaurs or gorillas or some kind of large creature on the rampage. And if you think about it, the skeleton warrior is quite different from any of those. It's a creature of mythology. And we've got this wonderful artwork. It's an iconic drawing of Sinbad fighting the skeleton. And I love the idea of Ray turning up at the movie studio and saying, this is what I want to see on the big screen. This is what I'm going to create from my own imagination. So to see that skeleton sequence in 1958, and then to see the skeleton model, which, as John said, is in perfect condition. And we've even reunited with its original sword and shield from 1958. So it literally could have jumped off the screen, and it's the best surviving original model from the collection. A lot of the older models, we've talked about the Redosaurus and so forth, they unfortunately did not survive from the 1950s, but the skeleton warrior looks fantastic. He looks like he could pick a fight with Kerwin Matthews and start round 2 any moment now.
And the fascinating thing, it's another first. It was Ray's first colour film. And at the time, Ray was concerned that the film stocks that were being used wouldn't be sufficiently detailed and high quality enough to hide the dynamation process. Because right up until that point, black and white had been used. And black and white film photography and laboratory work had been advanced so much that Ray's classic black and white films, you cannot see the joins, as it were. So a first in terms of colour, and the first of 4 films to be scored by the brilliant, iconic Mr. Bernard Herrmann, or Bernard Herrmann, as he's described in American documentaries. Maybe that's the correct pronunciation, Bernard Herrmann. But the score for that film is absolutely iconic, and we often hear it on compilations of Ray's films and works, and we use it here on the podcast. What brilliant music. What brilliant music.
The famous scene, it finally ended up in the cave on a spiral staircase. My original drawing showed Sinbad driving the skeleton up on the top. Because how do you kill death? That became a problem, you know. And the skeleton had to go up on a height so that when he was pushed off, he broke up into pieces so he couldn't fight anymore.
Now, moving us on, rather aptly to number 7. Yes, you've said it. You've stolen my thunder, just like one of the gods would do to one of the other gods.
Too heavy for the dead branch, eh?
How do you know that?
He told me.
Told you? Oh.
His name's Bubo.
But you're quite right, Bubo the Owl, a personal favourite of mine. Vanessa, how do you feel about the wonderful Bubo making it to the top 10?
I think that's lovely. He's got in Clash. He's got a lovely sense of humour and a little quirkiness in the film. It gives it a light feel to the film. In quite a dark scenario with the Kraken and Medusa. So I'm pleased Bubo's there.
And unlike most of the creatures in a Ray Harryhausen film, some of them are large, or they're quite aggressive, or they're seen as the bad guys. Bubo is none of those things, and he's really magical. He reminds me of a kind of a Christmas decoration. So many people, particularly when the film came out in 1981, thought it was a reaction to the first Star Wars film, and some of the reviews called him Bubo D2 because he was part owl but part R2D2. And of course, that wasn't the case, because Clash of the Titans had been written as a response to Jason the Argonauts, and the scripts and the ideas for Bubo the Owl predate Star Wars by nearly a decade.
Yeah, I think Boobo the Owl is amongst the most, and we've spoken about this on the podcast before, amongst the most divisive of your dad's creations. But I find on social media, if we post a picture of Boobo, it will get 2 or 3 times as many likes as any of the other creatures. So for everybody that dislikes Boobo, there's 2 or 3 people who absolutely love Boobo with a passion. And we keep we receive so many photos of people who have Boobo the Owl tattoos. You know, we got so many Boobo the Owl. We've got a little gallery on our Facebook page of Boobo tattoos from around the world. So he's definitely a fun character that's made a big impact on a generation of film fans. And as you say, Vanessa, he's quite different from a lot of the other creatures in the film, which I think adds to his charm.
And we have, of course, all of the versions of Boobo the Owl, because there's the full animated version that we know and recognise. There was an on-set version, if you like, an animatronics one, that was held by the actors at different points in the film. And then there are 2 smaller models, 2 small-scale models. So in total, that makes 4 Boobos. Is that right, Connor?
That's right. The two smaller ones I think are fascinating because there's a small, a miniature version of Boobo, which I think you see in long shots in his opening sequence where he's flying towards the tree. But then there's an even smaller version. There's a little version of Boobo that's the size of your fingernail, so delicate, and it's just fantastic. We had Andy Johnson, our photographer, take a photograph of all of those 4 Boobo models together, and last year for Vanessa's book. It's just great to see the amount of work that Ray put into the sense of scale of having, an animatronic Boobo and a stop motion Boobo, and then 2 other Boobos just for the sense of scale. And it's amazing and really wonderful that all 4 have survived. So for people who love Boobo, yes, we have enough Boobos to go around.
Boobo was a character very prominent in Greek mythology. We had him being converted into a mechanical owl. When we got behind schedule, I had to have some assistance, and I got Stephen Archer. He had sort of a puckish sense of humor, so I put him on Boobo the Owl. He did most of the shots of the owl, flying and on the ground, and he turned out to be quite a lovable character in the end.
So, who'd like to reveal the next position?
Well, I'm happy to announce this is another black and white classic. At number 6, it's the Emir from 20 Million Miles to Earth, 1957. And yes, a creation, I think, probably one of the most sympathetic creatures from all of Ray Harryhausen's films. It seems to have made a big impact on people who voted in our poll.
Yes, and I mean, I've always thought this of the Emir because I saw it later on because I wasn't around in the 1950s, but I always thought he had a look of the Kraken about him because he has that slight sort of monkey overbite. He's coloured green. The arms looks like he goes to the gym a lot. So I see a lot of similarities between the Emir and the Kraken, and the sequences here are wonderful, aren't they? Because we see him tiny inside a little bubble of gel as he kind of claws his way out, grows on the table. It's really quite spooky. So this kind of sits somewhere between sort of, what we call monster movies, but also horror cinema. And sometimes this would paired up with other horror films for midnight double bills. And there is a sense of foreboding, invasion of the body snatchers, of course, because the creature itself has landed from Venus on a ship that crashes into the Mediterranean Sea off the coast of Sicily, Italy. So quite a globe-trotting production, and I'm delighted to see it in there. I must say, it's been beautifully restored by the good folks down at the Columbia Pictures Archive at Sony Pictures. And it's been colorized as well. What do you guys think of the colorization of 20 Million Miles to Earth, which was Ray Harryhausen approved?
Yeah, no, I liked it. It's, again, it's the iconic movements and the swish of the tail and just the creature that has, Dad's movements, and it's such a Harryhausen film, really.
And Vanessa, I don't know if you know this, but your dad actually makes a cameo in that film. Have you seen this before? He's at the zoo just before the Emir's rampage. He's feeding peanuts to one of the elephants, which I think is quite a nice little thing for eagle-eye viewers to spot.
Oh, okay.
But yes, the Emir is, a classic. The colorization looks wonderful, and again, it's really great that your dad was able to supervise the colorization of those films, because they got it spot on. And you have the black and white. No one's ever going to remove the original versions, but it just gives you that option to watch the movie in a slightly different manner. Maybe for younger viewers, some younger people don't want to watch black and white films, and this just gives them a foot in the door for these classics from the 1950s. But yes, a very vulnerable character, one that I think you feel quite sorry for. He's not an antagonist. He's just a creature out of time and out of place. He's just looking for survival. Yeah. He doesn't attack anybody unless he's attacked first. He just wants to eat sulfur. He's not trying to eat anybody or eat any. There's a great sequence where he walks past a field of sheep, and he doesn't attack them. He's a docile creature. And yes, obviously a very heart-wrenching ending in Rome, in the Colosseum, as he is chased down by the Italian army.
Or we might be thinking about the sheep. I'll have them for later. You never know.
No, he's a vegetarian. He likes sulfur.
But interestingly, this is one of 2 films to make it into the top 10 whose co-stars were an animated elephant. So Gwangi, of course, there's an elephant in Valley of Gwangi, and of course there's the elephant that fights the Emir as well. So fascinating that 2 characters that had elephants as co-stars made it into the top 10. I wonder if there's a tip there for any other creatures wanting to be cast in creature features. Make sure your co-star is an elephant.
We wanted to give it a startling effect, so we decided to make it that every time it breathed our air, which the air in Venus was different, it grew twice the size overnight. And that seemed to work well.
Now, Vanessa, would you like to reveal, we're nearly halfway through, something very iconic coming up next?
Yes, number 5 is the Cyclops.
We are back to the 7th Voyage of Sinbad.
And that is an iconic film in itself, with, again, wonderful animation. And I'm glad he's at number 5. Bit gruesome, the film, in some bits where he's roasting people over spits and whatnot. But it's a good number 5.
Yeah, he's often cited, isn't he, by people like Dennis Muren at Industrial Light and Magic as being like a touchstone moment for visual effects. And of course, George Lucas said, without your father, there would very likely have been no Star Wars. So this sequence on the beach when he's fighting Sinbad, bright daylit sequence with lots of live actors and a giant colossus of a Cyclops. It's very difficult to hide the line between the special effect and the live action, and your father did it perfectly and beautifully. It's a great film. Unfortunately, we don't have the Cyclops, do we, Connor?
Well, we have his armature. We have the full armature of the Cyclops, which is a wonderful piece in itself. And this is another amazing part of our collection, because you can see what the insides of these models look like. And I think a lot of people would be very surprised to see just how thick the armature was, just how sort of robust the joints were, and its feet, the armature's feet, require 3 screws each for every movement. So if you think about that, every footstep that the Cyclops takes is your father was unscrewing 3 different screws, putting them back in again, plugging them in. Such a time-consuming process, but I'm glad that the armature has survived, because the Cyclops is an incredibly iconic piece, and I would have loved to have been there in 1958 amongst all of these people. So many filmmakers have said that it was the Cyclops in particular, when he appears so early in the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, and I think that helps. This incredible orange creation bursting out of his cave, and that just seems to have been this lightning bolt moment for all of this generation of film fans and filmmakers to say, wow, this is a stop motion film in colour, and look at this creature, look at this spectacle. Now, I was recently seeking out clips of the Cyclops, iconic pieces of the film to share, and it's quite difficult because the Cyclops appears throughout the film. He's in the film almost as much as Kerwin Matthews is, as Sinbad himself, because the Cyclops appears and disappears. Of course, there are two Cyclops. There's one that gets knocked off a cliff, and then there's a second Cyclops that appears a little later in the film. So if you love the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, then the Cyclops, he doesn't just appear for one sequence. He's woven throughout the story, and he's definitely sort of cemented himself as one of the top Ray Harryhausen creations.
In the original version of Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, there were to be two Cyclopses. And in Harryhausen, The Lost Movies, you can see some artwork where the two Cyclopses are having a bit of a wrestling match in front of some humans. Mm. It was a shame that didn't happen, because maybe Ray would have kept one of those two Cyclopses, or Cyclopsi. What's the plural for Cyclopses? I don't like octopi. Would it be Cyclopsi?
Cyclops. Yeah, I'm not sure.
It's one for the experts. It's one for the Twitter people to come and tell us we got it wrong.
Well, yeah, I'm sure they'll be in touch. But nevertheless, yes, we have. I think the Cyclops takes pride of place right in the top 5, and yeah, we love hearing people's memories of all of these creatures.
The Cyclops is in the actual story of Sinbad in another form. So I wanted to incorporate the Cyclops. When the picture was released in Britain, I was shocked to see that they'd cut a number of scenes of the Cyclops out because they thought it would frighten children, particularly where he was roasting the man on a spit, which wasn't very nice of him. But that was in the Sinbad story, and we wanted to try to keep it into the film.
Right, now it's number 4, and a personal favourite of mine, and one I voted for. Yes, I was allowed to vote in it, even though I'm only a trustee. I think we've all voted. I hope we all have. And I'm pleased to say, ones I voted for are in this top 10. At number 4, Carly from The Golden Voyage of Sinbad.
Dance for me.
Wow, what a sequence. Again, combining all of the expertise that your father had learnt through all of his filmmaking right up now to the early 70s. He comes back to Sinbad after The Valley of Gwangi and things didn't go well at the box office for the film. Charles Schneer and Ray Harryhausen decided to return to their favourites, the Arabian Adventures, to see if there was another journey for Sinbad. And Golden Voyage of Sinbad turned out to be just that, one of the most successful Harryhausen-Charles Schneer collaborations. The film has iconic sequences from left, right and centre, the marvellous Caroline Munro, John Philip Law, and of course Prince Kura, the evil Prince Kura, played by the fabulous Tom Baker, who won the role, of course, of Doctor Who after appearing in The Golden Voyage of Sinbad. What a wonderful film. What a brilliant sequence. It still works today. We had a screening of it at the Regent Street Cinema with Caroline Munro and with you, Vanessa, at the restored version of it. And wow, didn't it keep people held for its screen time? It really works.
Yeah, I think again it's a dance sequence and it's the movement and it all just ties in and it just works so well.
And she's a female creature, of course. We spoke earlier about whether Gwangi was a girl or a boy, was it male or female. Here, there's no doubt. And had Carly not been a female creature, I wonder if the impact would have been as great. Because, of course, as you said, she's a beautiful goddess who dances for Kura. But then, of course, the battle with Sinbad, and they find the missing piece, don't they, of the amulet
Inside her, yeah.
that inside her. It reminded me of when you break an Easter egg. You've had an Easter egg in the fridge, and you break it, and it breaks into 1,000 little chocolate pieces. What a wonderful sequence. And Connor, can you update us on Carly? Where is she today?
Well, Callie, again, has been restored by Alan Friswell. And Callie was probably the most delicate of all the models in the collection. She was in a special box, lying flat, and essentially could not be handled at all. I took one look at Callie and thought, I don't want to touch this creature, because Alan described her texture, the consistency of an oxo cube. So that's kind of how fragile and brittle she was. The latex was just crumbling to the touch. And in all honesty, Alan took this creature out of the box and said, I'm not sure how I'm going to do this. It was a challenge, and I have full faith in Alan. I always know that he'll find a way. But Alan actually developed a new polymer compound to restore Callie specifically. He went back to the drawing board and developed a new type of material that would stop Callie from disintegrating and allow him to repair any missing parts. Now, if you think about Callie in comparison to a creature like Calibos, for example, she's got 6 arms, so that means five fingers on each arm. It's a very complex task, and this is the kind of thing that we really need to have Alan create a series of lectures on the restoration for each creature, because I record everything that Alan does, and it's fascinating how he approaches all of these different challenges. So yes, Callie is now sturdy and now can be displayed, and again will be on show proudly at our centenary exhibition at the National Galleries of Scotland. But also, Vanessa, you were around for the Golden Voyage of Sinbad, so you were there in Malta for all of these wonderful sequences for Golden Voyage, and we caught up. You obviously have stayed in touch with Caroline Munro, but we caught up with one of the other actors from the film, Kirk Christian, during a visit to America last year. So with the Callie scene, I think Daddy was saying that for the dance sequence, I think he had women dancing, but I see on Caroline, she was saying that for the action parts where Callie is fighting with the Sinbad and his crew, that it was actors, stuntmen and that. So that was, trying to get the timing in with that and getting an idea of the movement for Callie. That was quite interesting. Yes, I think it was one of the most complex sequences that your dad ever put together. And we've got the kind of the diagrams that he drew in the archive of the set, and where everyone had to be and where Callie would be and how it would fit the animation, and where people entered, where they left, where they were struck, so forth. So yes, a very complex piece of animation, but one that has stood the test of time, and it seems to have definitely been the standout moment from the Golden Voyage of Sinbad, which is one of Ray Harryhausen's most beloved movies.
We were originally going to shoot the Golden Voyage in India, and Callie was a result of planning the picture for India. But when we changed our mind and shot it in Spain, for many reasons, we left the Callie sequence in. We felt it would be a very good dramatic situation.
So now we move things along, and Vanessa, would you like to tell us where we are next and who we can see next?
The next one is number 3, which would be Medusa from Clash of the Titans. And this is the only film that really put the bejeebers up me. I did not like Medusa at all.
Well, tell us that first moment. Describe it, exactly what happened.
Well, I think it's when Perseus is going into the cave to find Medusa, and it's all the shadows, and then you hear the rattle of the snake bit on her, and then you see the shadow, and just the whole thing is pretty yuck. I mean, it's beautifully done, but I didn't really like it. I don't like snaky things. So, but it was beautifully done, and a lot of time spent on each individual snake movement, on her head and then her body. But yeah, it was one of my least favorite ones on that.
Well, it still terrifies, doesn't it? We've had screenings with young audiences of the film in recent times, and they hide behind their eyes when Medusa's coming on. So it really has the same impact. So although, of course, everything ages, you know, the film will be 40 years next year. 40 years, can you imagine? Yet the
I can't believe that.
Yeah, but yet the impact hasn't deteriorated. It hasn't lessened. It's still as strong with audiences as ever. And now parents are bringing their children along. So parents who were scared 40 years ago are bringing their children along and can be scared again. And it's quite something, you know, when you think that, you know, Medusa, it's a simple creature in that she's a woman. She has a snake's tail or a snake's body and some snakes in her hair. And yet, for many people, it is the number one. You know, most people would say, for me, it's Medusa, and then everything else follows, because it has everything, as you said. It has atmosphere, it has acting, because your father was a brilliant actor through his fingers. It has pathos. You get a real sense of weight as well. As she drags herself along, you get a sense of this cumbersome body that she's been cursed with. And the sequence is just beautifully cut together. I mean, it's so difficult, you know, with this top 10 to choose the best of your father's work. In my eyes, it's all the best. They should all get gold stars and gold medals. And yet in the world of things have to be ranked, you know, into a top 10 and so on, this needed to be done for the centenary. But what a welcome position for Medusa. I would like to have seen her at number one, but I also would like to have seen a few of the others here at number one as well. So, you know, I'm not the best judge of this. Connor, you're the youngest of the three of us. How has Medusa affected you?
Well, Medusa stands out because, as you said, it's the closest that Ray Harryhausen ever got to, like, horror. And I know that Ray was a big fan of classic horror movies, the Universal horror films and so forth. And it is just this fantastic mix of different elements. The music as well, by Lawrence Rosenthal, just really eerie, and the sound effects put you on edge. And even though it is quite a short sequence, when you watch it overall, it's quite a short sequence. It just has that incredible impact, the darkness and the shadows. I think Medusa is one of those sequences that you could still watch in a cinema and hear the pin drop, because you know, it's such a masterful piece of work. And Medusa as a creature, it's interesting now. I think a lot of people now, if you ask them whether they were a fan of Ray's work or not, or whether they had watched Clash of the Titans, most people would describe Medusa as a snake woman, you know, a woman with a snake's body, or you know, a snake's tail. And actually, on screen up until that point, Medusa had mostly been portrayed as a regular woman with snakes in her hair. And it was Ray's design. Ray really sort of captured this in the public's imagination of Medusa being this combination of a female and a snake, with snakes in her hair as well. And that's still to this day, I think if you asked 100 people to describe Medusa from myth and from legend, they would describe something very similar to Medusa from 1981. So it's definitely captured the public's imagination, and it's part of the reason why Clash of the Titans is so fondly remembered.
And of course, yes, as you rightly say, she was a priestess who was banished and was cursed by one of the goddesses, and she normally appears in a white flowing robe. And as you say, in other incarnations in Hammer films and so on, in the Gorgon, she's like that. But interestingly, a female character again, and although at the time people wouldn't have recognised it, now it's quite empowering to see a female character like Medusa and Kali almost fighting for the top slot there, because Kali at number 4, Medusa at number 3, and I think a not too distant sister of those two characters is the figurehead from the Golden Voyage of Sinbad. I was particularly scared. I was incredibly young when I saw that film, and I was particularly scared of the figurehead. I live in Greenwich, which is the naval area, and I used to see figureheads at the museum. And seeing that figurehead coming alive and tearing itself off the front of that ship, you know, and I just feel, you know, your father was channeling the figureheads and Kali for Medusa. Wow, you know, he got it exactly right each time.
I didn't want to make just a normal woman with snakes in her hair. That wouldn't turn anyone into stone. So I felt we had to make her as ugly as possible and have this power in her eyes to turn people to stone.
If I may now, I'll reveal the penultimate choice, and it is Talos at number 2.
It must have been the wind.
Talos, wow, the sort of the King Kong of the Greek myth world. I mean, that whole sequence, again, much like Medusa, 30 or so years later, it's very atmospheric. It's not a fast-paced creature fight, and yet it's made it right up there to the top. It's a more subtle form of animation, and of course, he has the encumbrance of being made from copper and iron, so you can see and hear that in his movement.
I actually thought he was bronze. Is he not bronze?
Is he bronze? I don't know. We'll have to check with Twitter there. They'll soon put us straight. And he's no eyes as well. The fact he has no eyes. How clever of your father to figure out that the scariest creatures are sometimes the ones with no eyes.
Yes, like Medusa, it's another one of those sequences which has a very eerie edge to it. And when you see Hercules and John Kearney's character Hylas is escaping from this treasure hoard that they found, and Talos moves his head to face them with that creaking sound. It just became one of these most iconic movie moments, and I think that really puts shivers up people's spine to this day. This implacable face and this this automaton sort of chasing after Jason and his Argonauts. It's really, again, it's like so many of these scenes, it's become such an iconic piece. And Talos himself, I think Alan pointed this out because Alan had restored Talos quite recently as well. So in terms of animation, Talos doesn't actually do a great deal. He walks on the beach and he reaches down for the boat, but it's that simplicity, it's that that steady, slow pace, this unstoppable creature that's giant, that's so much bigger than the people he's bearing down upon. And one of the quotes from Ray that I really like is that he'd spent so many years perfecting this art of smooth, seamless stop motion, where the creature looked like it could be a living being. For Talos, he had to scrap all that and go for deliberately sort of jerky and stilted movement because, as you say, the creature's made of bronze, and he is a slow-moving, lumbering beast, but unstoppable. And yeah, a really wonderful sequence.
Absolutely, and great music, of course, from Bernard Herrmann again. Jason the Argonauts is right up there when people choose their favourite film. They say, what's your favourite Ray Harryhausen film? People often say Jason. And do you have any memories of Talos particularly, Vanessa?
No, not really. I remember seeing him in the display cupboard at home a lot, and everybody always seemed to graduate towards him and couldn't believe that he was so small and that he was so big on the screen.
I was always fascinated with the Colossus of Rhodes, so I thought this is a good chance to make Talos a Colossus. You spend your life trying to make smooth animation, and I made it typically stiff, and so we could put the sound effects of iron wrenching against itself.
We spoke with John Kearney, who of course played Hylas in Jason and the Argonauts, and he remembered what it was like filming that sequence. And one of his happiest memories was the fact that your dad was there on the beach directing the whole sequence, and they all knew that your dad was the man that was making the film. They knew he was the one that you had to listen to, and just this wonderful memory of falling face down on the beach and looking up to what at the time was an invisible creature, and then of course seeing this magic appear on screen.
Because you see, when he did his job, he saw the scene. He saw the scene, which is why he was able to make these lovely artworks of his own vision of the scene. But he relied on mere fallible faces to bring it off. So he just told me what he wanted and then react accordingly. In other words, John, you're afraid. That's your basic emotion. You're seeing something that's about 20 feet tall coming to pummel you. That's the main expression. And you're trying to run to avoid it, and he's after you. And you know that one step of his makes up 100-yard sprint for you. So that's why he wanted me panicking and breathless as well. So I was running up and down before we said action. So that he got exactly what he wanted. No, he was, in a sense, the kindest man to be ruthless on the film set. And that's the loveliest combination, because I would have done anything for him. Had I been working against a real big man being a giant, it would have been a different kind of show and a different kind of reaction. I would have reacted only to the face I see. But instead, I had no face to see. I was just called out numbers. How would you like to react to 12 o'clock? Here's the man who just played the Hamlet, reacting to 12 o'clock, 9 o'clock. But he is also running, remember. The cameraman is being pulled. And it was a running operation. And his direction was a running commentary. That's how I reacted to him. But in the minutes between, there was time to get the breath back, time to talk about it. That's when he gave you a purpose for the scene, where it fitted in and so on.
That's fabuloso. And now, I think it's only right and it's only fitting that Ray Harryhausen's daughter, the fabulous Vanessa Harryhausen, reveals the final position and the final creature or creatures.
Number 1 is the Children of the Hydra's Teeth.
Kill! Kill, kill, kill them all! Get back!
Also known as the Skeletons from Jason and the Argonauts.
I know, and that sequence is so amazing, and the time it took, and I think everybody always remembers that. Out of all Dad's films, that is one of the iconic ones for the movement, the fight scene, and it's tremendous, and I think that's great. Thank you who all voted for number 1 for the Hydra's Teeth. I think it's great with the skeletons and that.
Of course, originally the sequence was going to be set at night time. We've talked often about this on our various podcasts, and the censors said no. Jason was going to be chased into Hades, into hell, by the Hydra, and there he was going to disturb the graves of dead soldiers who would then come out and fight him at night time. When the script was submitted to the censors, they said no, you can't have a sequence like that at a bewitching hour and receive a family certification. You're going to need to do something that's in a more broadly daylight sequence. And so that's why the scene was set at daytime. But of course the challenge for your father then was how to hide the interaction between the animated creature and the live action. And it's much more difficult to do that in bright sunlit sequences. And of course he did it perfectly, as we know, because of course it's gone to number 1. And not a surprise at number 1, but a worthy number 1.
It is, very, very much.
No, it's the scene that stands out most, and I think for good reason, because it's one that I personally never get tired of watching. But there's so much going on in that skeleton sequence. There's so many little bits and pieces, so many wonderful tricks that your dad introduced to the scene, and it's just a masterclass of stop motion animation. It's very different from the scene we discussed previously, the skeleton sequence from the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, because that's a very close-up, one-on-one sequence with the skeleton fighting Sinbad. This is just this army completely overruns Jason and his team. They're on the back foot from the word go, and you just see all these wonderful all these things that your dad did to, in a way, make life more difficult for himself. You've got skeletons jumping over people. You've got Argonauts stabbing their swords into the skeletons and then, having no effect and dropping to the ground. All of these wonderful little tricks. And even though it's quite a short piece of film, it's one you could rewatch over and over again and just, how did he do this? And what an exciting scene. It's one I think that just it reminds so many people, I think, of happy memories of watching Ray's films and watching Jason and the Argonauts, you know, with their parents or whoever. And, you know, it's really ingrained itself in the public consciousness, especially here in the UK. When I tell people what my job is, they immediately will say, wow, those skeletons are incredible. They terrified me as a child.
Somebody asked me a very interesting question that I've never heard before, actually. Were any of the skeletons females? Could any of the skeletons be a female? And I said, well, I don't know. I've never really thought about it, but that's an interesting question.
Well, probably not, because if they were soldiers' graves that were disturbed at the time, it mostly would have been men that were sent to war. So it's a good question.
But there were, in Greek mythology, there were women warriors.
Yes, there were actually, and I think we'd have to refer that question to our resident expert, Mr. Alan Friswell, for him to check the hips.
Well, someone will get technical about the hip thing, because you'll know with the size of the hips.
You would
with
indeed.
Archaeology and that if it's a female, then the size of the way the hips are different from a male's hips.
We'll have to investigate that.
I
for our
know,
next
it is,
podcast.
isn't it?
It's brilliant.
Well, I think it's a good point. I think, you know, like Guanji, dinosaur, there's no reason why all these dinosaur creations may not be female too. I think, you know, these creatures, there's every chance, I suppose, that Guanji or some of the skeletons may have been female. In which case, yes, it's quite a balanced poll overall when you see the top 10.
Now, we do have the skeletons in the collection, and they're in very good condition. What we don't have is one of the sequences that was deleted from the film. So there's a sequence with a skeleton that's lost his head, looking for his head. And those few seconds of animation were cut from the release print, and sadly, they haven't yet been located. So if we ever do locate those, then we'll try and reunite them with the rest of the skeletons. But the film itself has been scanned in 4K by the folk down at Sony Pictures, who look after the Columbia Library. And on the 29th of June this year, we're having a special simultaneous screening, or a simulcast, of Jason and the Argonauts, which are going to be starting at 7:30 GMT, Greenwich Mean Time. So if you'd like to come along and join us from the comfort of your own home and watch, whether it's on VHS, Laservision, Laserdisc, DVD, or Blu-ray, at 7:30 we're going to kick off, and there's going to be a special announcement from the foundation first, and then we'll be straight into Jason and the Argonauts, and we're going to watch along with you folks, and we're going to be tweeting, aren't we, Connor, and commenting as the film goes along.
Yeah, it's going to be a really special moment because, you know, a lot of people are still at home right now in June 2020, and it's great to be able to sit at home around the world, all celebrating Ray's life and films and legacy together, and we'll be able to live tweet and Instagram behind the scenes photos from the film and facts and little pieces of information, but most of all just enjoy the movie, you know, just sit in there and enjoy this classic film once more and kind of reflect upon its legacy and upon all of these creatures that we've been discussing today. So yeah, please join us June 29th, Ray Harryhausen's 100th birthday. What could be more fitting than watching Jason and the Argonauts with Ray's friends and Ray's fans across the world?
And we're going to be putting together the top 10 creatures as well into a video. So you're going to be able to go online now. We're going to be loading that now along with this podcast. So you can see all top 10 together. A bit like Top of the Pops for Ray Harryhausen creatures.
Yeah. And I just wanted to say to everybody out there who took the time to vote for their favourite creature in Dad's films from 1 to 10, thank you for taking the time, and thank you for keeping his memory alive. He would be absolutely tickle pink that, without you guys, his memory would have just slowly slipped away. But thanks to you all, you've kept this wonderful, incredible animator alive in your thoughts and his films as well. So thank you very, very much from his daughter, Vanessa.
My favorite sequence, well, I suppose the skeleton was the most trying sequence, so that was one of my favorites. It was the most challenging because there were 7 skeletons fighting 3 men.
So that was terribly difficult.
It was complicated because when one man brings his sword down, during the rehearsals, he had to know where to stop. And I had to get a skeleton at that point so that when he stopped his sword, there was a skeleton there to stop it. And that required a great deal of detailed planning ahead and counting of frames. Every frame of the live action had to be analyzed and charted so that when they moved around, they would be at the right place at the right time.
Lovely. Well, I think that leaves us to say thank you, Vanessa, for taking part in this podcast. We hope we can keep you here for a few more podcasts in the future, because it's always good to hear your thoughts and to hear your reminiscings of your father. And of course, the future plans we have, we'll be having you back and we'll be doing an in-depth investigation into your book, the fabulous Ray Harryhausen, Titan of Cinema, which is the must-buy book of this year. So we will definitely have you back to find out about the making of that book.
Okay, will do.
Great. Well, all that leaves me to say is thank you, Connor. Thank you, Vanessa. Do tune in on 29th of June at 7:30 p.m. and we look forward to hearing all of your comments.
Thank you both.
Thank you all.
Thank you everybody for listening.
The simple process of walking into a cinema one day changed my life completely. I grew fascinated with the fact that you could put on the screen inanimate objects such as stop-motion dinosaurs and give the illusion that they are alive. And that has always fascinated me, the art of movement, the art of bringing things to life.
Copyright in the Ray Harryhausen podcast is owned by the Ray and Diana Harryhausen Foundation, a registered Scottish charity, number SC 001419 2020. This recording may not be reproduced in whole or in part without written permission from the Foundation. The views expressed within these podcasts do not necessarily reflect those of the Foundation, its trustee, or employees. For further terms and conditions, please contact us at rayharryhausen.com, where you can find our Facebook and Twitter links.